In this lecture, I will review most of the things that we have covered so far. So let's start off with class. So you learned how to create a class using the keyword class followed by a class name. So what is a class? A class is basically a data type that you've defined yourself, right? And we also know that we can give a class specific variables, right? Suppose int L, H, W. So I've given my class 3 variables, and these variables are called instance variables. Okay, and now class is basically a template for an object. So how do you create an object? Well, generally you create an object in a main method. So let me create another class. Let's call this box demo, and let's write a main method in this box class. So your main method is your part of the program that actually gets executed. And so I've kept my main method in this box demo class, and we've learned that we should name our file name with the class that contains the main method, right? So let me call my file boxdemo.java, and as you can see, since this one contains the main method, I've used an access modifier public here. So we've discussed about the reasons for this in detail in another video, so you can refer to it if you are still confused about this. Anyway, so how do you create an object? So to create an object, you use the class name followed by an identifier followed by the new keyword like this, right? And we learned that this box object, or so for the sake of consistency, let me use the same naming. So this box object here is basically what? A reference variable. It holds an address in memory where my actual box object is present. So when you write new box, your object is created, and what the new keyword does is basically allocates memory for an object during runtime. So basically we saw that when you first declare a box variable, box mybox, what this creates is essentially a reference variable that can refer to a box object. So you have just a variable here and nothing else. And when you write mybox equals new box, what happens is that a box object is created in memory and your reference variable mybox refers to it. Okay, so I've used box object here, and in the diagram they've used the variable name mybox. Okay, so we've also learned how we can assign variables to an object. So let me assign a variable L5. So to assign a variable, we use a dot operator, right? So here I've assigned a variable of 5 to length, or L. So again, we've learned that we can have the same reference variable. I mean, we can have two different reference variables pointing to the same object, right? So suppose if I create another box, well, let's call this box object 2. I'll just call this box 1 in short and box 2 in short. Okay, so what I've done here is created a box variable here that can refer to a box object. So instead of assigning a new object to it, what I'm going to do is assign the reference of the old object here. So now suppose if I print out box2.l, what I'm going to get is the value of 5, since basically box 1 and box 2 refers to the same object, as you can see here in this diagram. So again, we learned that suppose if I were to change something using box 2 and try to access that same thing box 1, I would again get the same results, right? Since both of these refer to the same object. Okay, so then we learned about methods. So methods are blocks of code that runs only when it is called. Suppose let me declare a method here called int setDimensions. So methods can be of many types. So first up, we learned about the void method. So let me demo that first. So suppose void print volume. So the way you declare a method is that you first write the return type followed by the method name. So here you can have access modifiers as well, but we'll ignore it for the time being. So you have the return type here followed by the method name. So this means I've created a method called void print volume, so it should return the volume. So let me print the volume. So I'm doing exactly that. And methods are blocks of code that runs only when it is called. So I've written a method here, but if I don't call it, it will never be executed. So as you can see, since I have not called the method, nothing is being printed. So to call a method or invoke a method, I use the same convention that I use to call assign value to a variable or print a instance variable. So let me call this. Okay. So as you can see, now my print volume is showing a value of 0. Why? Because L, H and W all have the values of 0. So we'll discuss about why L, H and W has been assigned the variable 0 when we talk about constructors a bit later. Anyways, so for the time being, let's just use assign values on our own like this. So let's assign L, H and W the following values, and now if I print volume, I'm going to get the volume, which is 5 cube. In other words, 5 into 5 into 5. So that was a void method. We also learned that methods can also have return types. So if you write something like this, int get volume, now you can return an integer value. So suppose let me now return the volume value into W. So now if I can store the volume here in a separate variable in my main method when I call the get volume method here, right? System.out.println. So now if I print volume here, I'll get the same result as well. Finally, we learned that methods can also have parameters. So parameters are values that you pass when you call the method. So let me write a method here called int square, which basically squares a number that you give to it. Okay, so this method accepts an integer value here and say I'm going to return the square. So let me return num into num. Okay, so now suppose if I call system.out.println square, and if I pass a value, suppose say 10, I'm going to get the square returned here and it's going to get printed here. So previously what I was doing was that the value that was being returned, I was storing it in a separate variable. So let's try calling it that. So there's a problem here. Since square method is a method that belongs to box class, I have to invoke it from an object of box class. So let me use this object here to call the square method. So now you can see I've gotten my desired result here. So that was pretty much everything that we had learned so far.